Hello and welcome to this video on eating yourself to death and how realistic this might be. There's a scene towards the end of Monty Python's The Meaning of Life where just one more teeny tiny wafer is all it takes to turn the beast man into nothing more than shreds of offal across the fine dining establishment. In other cases, we have effects of an edible meal gum. In more literal cases, we have chefs working themselves to death, or possibly losing their job after bringing a rodent into the kitchen. At least in the first two cases, we can look at what happens. In the latter, we won't, as knowing how the food is made can ruin the enjoyment of said food. Eating yourself to death is typically thought of as obesity, and technically that is true. Eventually you will die. Strictly speaking, it won't be from the obesity directly. Rather, it is nearly always complications of obesity such as atherosclerosis, hypertension, diabetes, and so on. To eat yourself to death in this video will be a rather more literal meaning. Surprisingly, despite being more literal, there are a number of ways for this to happen. The first is rare but can occur, especially when looking at, say, eating contests or other scenarios in which you will suddenly increase the amount of food you're eating after a protracted period of not eating anywhere near as much. It's the process of gorging yourself on hefty quantities of anything, and it will cause problems with gastric expansion. A fancy way of saying your stomach swells from all the food in it. The ability, or perhaps better to say a limited ability, to grow so big before complications arise is the first way you can eat yourself to death. The stomach rupture. This is the proper name, or at least it's properly called, a gastric perforation. If your stomach cannot hold the volume of content suddenly, and generally forced into it, the stomach will try and expand. Because there is a limit to how much it can expand with the multiple layers of muscles that band the stomach, it will eventually be unable to expand any further, mostly because those muscles have reached the full extent of their ability to stretch. Like a balloon that has too much blown into it, it then runs the risk of a rupture. This is not unreasonable, particularly if, say, the food you're eating is particularly solid. You've consumed something that's relatively large, such as, say, swallowing a large piece of food in one go, or sometimes an entire fruit, and other things again that slow down the ability of the stomach to break down whatever's in there. This leads to then the previously mentioned gastric perforation, or perforation of the stomach. In order for it to be, let's say, deadly, although even without this it can be quite unpleasant, it needs to be a full thickness injury of the lining of the stomach, that is to say, it has to go through all the layers of the stomach. Once this happens, you have a big problem. You've now exposed the peritoneum, or the lining that covers both the stomach and most of the inside of your abdominal cavity. Having exposed this to not only the secretions from your stomach, so say peptidases that break down protein, but the hydrochloric acid that's there to break down the food, and of course any possible bacteria that may or may not have found their way in, well, now you have problems. This will at least initially cause inflammation because your body's going, holy shit, we literally have shit right throughout the abdomen and it should not be there. Further to that, the damage caused from the previously mentioned things like peptidases, hydrochloric acid and so on will also cause aggravation. And of course, if this doesn't get solved quickly enough, a bacterial infection. This will inevitably lead to something like sepsis and then death if, unfortunately, the insides of your body don't start breaking down before then. This is perhaps the least kind way to die. The next is ironic. That is if you try and eat healthy. There are some foods that prove a net negative in certain nutrients, minerals, and more when consumed. That is, the amount you get from a given food is less than you lose from excretion, metabolism, and so on of that same food. In other cases, the food is a calorie negative. In most cases, this is because the food is actually water-rich in composition. It takes more energy to either heat the water up to body temperature, or to otherwise move it and dispose of it because you have too much in your body. This means that the metabolism or breakdown of that food stuff provides fewer calories than the food stuff itself does, leading to a net loss. In other instances, the food you're eating will have a net negative effect on certain things you're trying to consume. For example, if you have a long-term diet, let's say a A diet that is, let's say, vegan or, for example, vegetarian that's more restrictive, you can find that you can begin to lose weight because you don't have the necessary things in your diet, such as fats. And this can cause eventual nutritional harm, or in some instances a lack of vitamin C. This is a fairly common one, at least initially, for a lot of people who are dieting. In this case, it's not necessarily the food itself that will kill you, or the eating of the food, or rather it's simply a byproduct of not having a well-balanced diet. In other cases, we have food that can be a net draw on nutrients that are needed, although this is more rare by comparison. There are some foods and diets that, if you were to follow them or consume them, provide certain nutrients, but in order to provide those nutrients, others are taken away. Essentially, you're using one to be able to get access to the other. Iron can be an example. It uses certain B vitamins, and it absorbs the B vitamin along with the iron, and then the B vitamin essentially gets used up. However, the catch here is that too much iron leads to the B vitamins using up entirely, and then the excess iron that's been absorbed is later defecated. Essentially, the body's seen there getting rid of it if it doesn't deposit it inside the liver. Since the vitamins are not recycled and recovered, it can cause a net loss. This again, of course, assumes issues around iron absorption. And next we have diuretics. Coffee is the example most people jump to, but that is less accurate than you might think. Funnily enough, the volume of water consumed in coffee is nearly always more than enough to offset anything lost and then some again, due to diuresis arising from caffeine consumption. Not so easily counted is alcohol, especially ethanol. Ethanol has the effect of deterring, or perhaps better to say down-regulating, the antidiuretic hormone. And this is the hormone responsible for your body holding on to water. Because your body is no longer trying to hold on to your water, and therefore you have an increase in diuresis, or the rate at which you pee. And combining the increase in sugar consumption from most alcoholic drinks such as beer, cider, wine, any of your standard alcoholic drinks, the increase in blood volume from the water in the beverage, and decreased antidiuretic hormone activity, you start to pee like a horse. Except unlike a horse, you won't stop so readily. The effect of inhibiting the antidiuretic hormone takes time to wear off. Now, it is true, you will probably die from alcohol poisoning before you die from diuresis, but one does not preclude the other. Moving on from diuresis, we have the other side of the coin, or should that be pelvis? Laxatives. A common food source of laxatives is sugar-free gum, as the sweetener used is just that, a laxative. In short, diarrhea. Yes, your chewing gum could cause you to expel such noxious waste from your rear end so frequently and in such quantities that you could die. If not gum, there are of course other foods, and especially food that's gone bad, that can do the same. Like with alcohol, it has a lot to do with hydration issues or similar problems. It's all in the same general area. And not general areas in where it's coming from, but rather in the problem's nature. It's the loss of fluid from your rear. It has to be made up somehow. The simple answer is blood, and certainly you can reduce the amount of water, but that will only go so far. After that, the blood has to get water from somewhere, because blood will keep flowing, and the way it's going to draw this extra water into it to get that extra fluid volume is from drawing out water from local tissues around the vascular system. Any and all tissues. That includes important organs like your heart, brain, liver, kidneys, and so forth. As you take away water from these organs, they function less well, and it gets worse with time, eventually leading to failures. Or, less metaphorically, the cells and then tissues start to die. And when part of your brain starts to die from dehydration, things have gone from bleak to very bad. Less immediately obvious are foods and drinks that act as a stimulant, and not just a mild stimulant or modest quantities of it. What we're talking about is something that are significant effects or significant quantities, leading to significant effects on your body. To use a simple but direct example, if Futurama shows Fry drinking 100 cups of coffee in a day. If this was the standard 60 to 150 milligrams of caffeine per cup of coffee, he would consume somewhere between 6,000 and 1,500 milligrams of caffeine over the course of a day. The half-life of caffeine is about 6 hours, a little bit less, but let's keep the numbers easy for now. If we say he had 4 cups of coffee to start the day and 1 cup of coffee every 15 minutes by the end of the day, we would get about 100 cups, and this is the line, including its half-life and what he's consuming every 15 minutes. The safe threshold before death is likely between 10.5 and 14 grams, assuming a 70 kilogram person, although doses as low as a quarter of this can be deadly. In the case of Fry, well, he is just safe if he maintains consumption at a steady pace and not a large bolus-like consumption. For example, if he drinks 4 or 5 cups of coffee at one time. The danger is not necessarily just limited to inordinate amounts of caffeine in your body. It's what the caffeine will do. Now, we touched on the issues around diuresis earlier, but that's likely not to be the big issue here. In fact, it's quite possibly the opposite. The first is going to be the increase in blood volume, because you're constantly consuming liquid and thereby putting liquid into the bloodstream, raising blood pressure. Further to that, caffeine is a stimulant that will increase heart rate. Heart rate goes up, blood volume goes up, blood pressure goes up, and it creates a sort of steady cycle that ever increases, eventually leading to your heart, not functioning so great after you basically blow a hole in it. It's a cardiac rupture, which can theoretically happen. Admittedly, not as likely with caffeine as it is with, say, drugs like meth, but, well, a Florida man doesn't really tell us a lot about what happens to him after he goes into the morgue. If he did, zombie Florida man's a terrifying idea. The last example we have for you is relatively diet-specific. It's mostly about keto diet, carnivore diets, and similar sorts of things. Essentially any diet that tries to exclude carbohydrates. The reason for this is somewhat simple. If poorly managed, a diet relying almost exclusively on fat and protein for energy will lead to ketoacidosis. This can range from mild to severe if not managed well, and understand there are times and places for ketoacidosis to be an appropriate thing, but not as a standard diet. As the name would already suggest, this is a condition related to the acid on the pH scale. It is a condition where the body, among other things, starts to generate ketones. These are a sign the body is beginning to break down amino acids and lipids for energy. On the short-term basis, this is okay. It's essentially what you do when you're exercising. The problem with the ketones is that they are acidic, and they make the blood more acidic. Enough so that the normal buffer systems inside blood struggle to make up for that difference. Again, short-term basis, it's all fine. The body can essentially swing back over time. But in the longer term, if ketoacidosis keeps going, you begin damaging things that don't want to be damaged. And this is where the longer term basis is not so good. And not so good is the nice phrasing of that. The effect of acidifying the blood and therefore the body is to damage tissues and organs. Again, on a short term basis, not a major problem. It's not good, but you can recover with mostly no lasting harm. But once you start building up and increasing the amount of ketone bodies that are circulating in your bloodstream, you begin to reach physiological concentrations that are actually dangerous. And these will tip over the buffer system's capacity, and you will have essentially completely shifted the pH balance of your blood, and then you begin to get issues. If it's a long-term problem, things are going to get bad, and they will get bad relatively quickly, leading to initially simply being tired, lethargic, and similar, a fruity-smelling breath from those ketone bodies, and then gradually things will get worse again, until eventually you fall unconscious and then enter a coma and die. Which, yeah, not everybody's idea of a dieting approach, but technically death is one way to lose several kilograms of weight. Not necessarily the best way, but a way. This is how, though rare, it is possible to arguably eat yourself to death, and by no means is this an exhaustive list, it's just a few examples that come to mind, let's say. Sort of entertaining anecdotes, in a very morbid and dark sense of the term entertaining. Thank you for watching this. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. And please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.